IAMAI's first edition of Digital Transformation Summit. Let's start a panel discussion on data theft and security aspects of data handling. We have with us our moderator, Mr. Rajesh Dhuddu, VP and Practice Leader, Blockchain and Cybersecurity Tech Mahindra. Our panelists, Vinayak Godse, Vice President, Data Security Council of India, Usha Murali, Chief Risk Officer, Airtel Payments Bank, Ankur Pandey, Co-founder and CTO, Signzy, Rajesh Thapar, Chief Information Security Officer, Axis Bank. Welcome all of you. Dear delegates, please keep posting your questions in the chat box. The panel may address a few in the end. Over to you, Mr. Dhuddu.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ayushi. Thanks for the kind introduction and welcome everyone. I'll just set the context and then ask our panelists in terms of for their inputs and insights. We are fortunate to have a diverse mix of industry leaders on this particular panel. So I was reading an interesting data point yesterday. And as per that particular data point, it said that cybercrime is the third most lucrative crime in the world. And that particular analyst has pegged the cybercrime just below the narcotics crime. And I was thinking, because of the pandemic and lockdowns, the narcotic guys may not have got their business well. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of those narcotic guys got upskilled and then moved to cybercrime. I'm sure that would have definitely happened. And I was also reading another interesting data point, which says that we know that a lot of digital transformation is being driven by internet. Data explosion is being driven by internet. And then the analysts estimate that cybercrime will extract 15 to 20% of the annual value on the internet, pegging the total bounty of cybercrime to about $20 billion, which is basically not billion, actually $20 trillion, and which is kind of expected to increase. So the cyber matters will continue to be important. Cybercrime will not be unabated. It will only increase. Given that context, I wanted to invite Rajesh Thapar and ask for his views on aspects pertaining to human errors. What I was reading is human errors have traditionally constituted 2/3 of data breach incidents. How has this changed, especially in the context of the current pandemic, where a lot of people are working remotely, and remote working is also expected to be a major lurking ground for cyber actors? What trends are you seeing, especially from the perspective of running such a key bank in India, where you have to facilitate your workforce remote access to mission critical banking applications? Over to you, Rajesh.
Yeah, thanks, Rajesh. So human has always been, in all our cyber professional world, we always say human is a weakest link. We had always been having that perspective that this is the area which we have to strengthen, while we have process technologies best of those in place, but there will be this leg which can lead us into issues. So with work from home, that's only a perspective which has changed slightly from there, because the kind of human errors which have caused these breaches have, to me, I categorize in normally three ways. So one, which has been social engineering based ones, wherein a victim falls prey to something because of his judgment of a particular communication, or he trusts something which he is not supposed to trust. Second is a misconfiguration which has been induced by a system administrator or a guy who has to configure a particular appliance or device in a particular way. He did not do it. It may be intentional, it may be accidental. So that's another way of where a human error can cause a breach or an incident or a pathway for somebody to come in. Third is a misdelivery. Your intention was to deliver something which is of trust to a particular organization or a particular entity, but it is redirected by mistake to another entity, wherein you may even share a confidential document on an IPR or from that perspective. So these three are the key things which human errors were responsible for creating those paths for what we may term it as a cyber.
Hello, did we lose Rajesh's connection? I think Usha, Vinayak, Ankur, can you hear me?
Yes, Rajesh, we can hear you.
Yeah. Maybe there's a connection challenge. We'll probably give a minute for Rajesh to come back. Okay, maybe what we can do is once he's back, we can revisit that particular topic. Moving over to Usha, while Rajesh was covering about the aspects of human error, I agree with him in terms of, in an organization, they can have state-of-the-art cybersecurity products and state-of-the-art cybersecurity technology. But if the security awareness of people is not up to the mark, then they are as vulnerable as a company who do not have those kind of investments, right? And moving to your specific area from, especially from a perspective of payments bank, what we understand that there are a lot of identity thefts that are happening in the banking and the retail industry. Primarily, the intent is to steal the personally identifiable information. And with digital payments exploding, a lot of PI being archived and exchanged, what are the various security lapses that one should be aware of, and how do you see this space evolving, primarily to get to the objective of, where the central government post demonetization has said digital payments safe be or sahi be. So what are the trends that you are seeing over there, and how can we make them even more safer, and how can we make them even more sahi or relevant in the current context?
Sure. Thanks, Rajesh. I think we need to be aware of the, explosion. All of us are aware of the explosion in digital transactions. And definitely the sensitivities around, PII is there. And especially in a regulated entity, supervised entity like us, it's even higher. And in a payment bank, you rightly mentioned the class of customers that we are, aiming to serve is the underprivileged and the underbanked. So, as far as the security of PII is concerned, as far as avoiding identity thefts and putting controls in place is concerned, I think I would look at it, from a, let's say, two sides of it. One is from a customer level itself. I think the importance of customer awareness cannot be understated or underestimated. It's very important to increase the level of awareness, especially for the segment that we are dealing with, in terms of who are just, let's say, transitioning into probably first-time digital users. Typically, we have people going in for their first smartphones and for the first time trying to do Google Pay and rural unbanked areas. So I think it's very important. Customer awareness to us is an important aspect, which could be at the first level. Let's say avoiding any kind of lapse. Secondly, I would say that, yeah, once the customer trusts us with his data, I think it is onerous upon us, it is incumbent upon us to ensure that the trust reposed by the customer is well safeguarded, and the data of the customer, there should be no scope for any kind of theft. So I think in this direction, there has been a lot of industry-wide best practices driven by the regulators themselves. And let's talk of, let's say, one of the key, PII, which is Aadhaar, and all of us are aware of the sensitivities around it. And therefore, keeping in mind the sensitivities, you have several guidelines by the UIDAI, such as storing it in the vault, having restricted access, and then the input field itself is a password field. There is, in case it's manually circulated, redaction, encryption. I think all of this helps us in kind of ensuring that there are no lapses. I think following the guidelines to the T with no, let's say, scope for any interpretation. I think that's the first step for us. The other things are, I think, used very widely in the, let's say, information security world by regulated entities and others as well, in terms of, access controls, which is on need to know access to critical solutions where we are storing the PII. I think all that is through the privilege identity management solutions. And again, as another level of control, PIM is integrated with SIEM, so that if there is any unauthorized access, we should be able to, get to it. The other one that I would say is more of a detective control that we look at in order to identify at 3 levels whether there is any exchange of PII, or whether anybody has downloaded PII from let's say from a organizational perspective. So we have data leakage prevention at endpoint, and we have it at the network, email level, all of that. Now, over and above this, there are, I think, two things which, Rajesh, I would like to call out.
Sure.
One is proprietary, let's say, to the bank, which is, the third level of authentication. Let's say there is an identity theft. The customer is protected, an Airtel payment bank customer who's also coincidentally, if he's an Airtel user, would be protected by the option of having a third level of authentication by way of SafePay. So this will, protect the customers' funds from, getting stolen. That is one. The second thing is at a macro level where, the regulator, RBI, has come up with a recent guideline with very tight timelines on implementation. And they have issued a master circular on digital payment security. And I expect that, implementation of all the measures which have been mentioned there, it's a very comprehensive guideline issued to supervised entities. And I think this would definitely go a long, long way in making digital payments Save Bhi or Sahi Bhi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Usha. What's interesting to find out is, in terms of, while everybody is talking about the second level of authentication, the two-factor authentication, you guys have gone one step ahead by bringing in a third element of authentication. And of course, your commercials highlighting this particular aspect on Airtel Payments Bank are also very, very catchy and very rightly aimed at the older generation who are more vulnerable to frauds on the financial transactions, and also the people in the rural areas who are more vulnerable to frauds on the financial transactions. So a very good segment that you guys are focusing on. And I must say that you guys are doing a phenomenal job over there. Thank you, Usha. Thanks for all the insights.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Now that Rajesh is back, we'll loop back into Rajesh. So Rajesh, in terms of, you did touch upon interesting aspects about the human errors, and given the current pandemic and the remote working, how have you guys coped up that particular aspect, especially with when it comes to Axis Bank, where everything can stop, but banking cannot stop, and then you need to give not only remote access to your customers, but now you have to give remote access to your workforce to facilitate those mission critical banking transactions. So any learnings, any best practices that you guys have implemented? I'm sure you would have implemented many best practices over there, and audience will gain from those best practices. If you could touch upon those, please.
Sure. So end of the day, it's primarily the basic hygiene and the basic cyber practices which are required. I mean, even if you work from home, the only thing is the threat landscape changes. Are you able to hear me, Rajesh?
Yeah, absolutely. Loud and clear.
Absolutely. So it's only the perspective changes, the threat landscape changes, the impact changes, because earlier the controls which we always had in the organizations were keeping a context that there will be certain assets which will be exposed from within the organization. So you had certain level of trust with some of those. So here you actually transition slowly and gradually towards what may be phenomenally, what may be called as a zero trust, but that's a journey. I mean, right? So you want to trust, but you want to verify. So your authentication parameters get added, gets a beef up. Then you have a contextual level monitoring. You have to do a step up monitoring that you have to do. And end of the day, the control weaknesses, probably earlier, if any of the machine has a control weakness, it was earlier thought to be confined within the perimeter. In today's term, if you move that out, the perimeter has actually gone to homes. So all those defense in layer is actually diluted now. So end of the day, the end point becomes identity in itself, a perimeter in itself, and everything that is required. So it's important when an endpoints try to reach out to the organization, you have a secure VPN infrastructure, you have remote access servers. If a server infrastructure is to be connected, you video record that. So some of those controls which becomes a deterrent. At the same time, you are also ensuring that only the right people with the right level of authentication and the right device are able to connect back to the ecosystem, right? So for that, it's something which is a journey that we took, to be honest, because of the time pressure, because of the criticality of operations. There were certain calls that were taken with the risk appetite, and then we gradually kept strengthening it. So that is a learning also, is we can go in for something, but we have to put a timelines to remediate all those risks which can emanate from something like that, and keep gradually improving our set of controls, right? So a VPN, if I say, an RBAC, so probably a role-based access, if I may come back to the controls, role-based access is important, but it was always thought to be from a perspective from within the perimeter or within a set of infrastructure or within a VLAN you are connected. Now you are connected over either a VDI or a VPN. How do you ensure that you don't have any access which is given out beyond what he's supposed to get? So the role-based access actually gets a little bit more changed in a finer context as well. I mean, whether at what point of time, what time of the day a guy is logging in, that's another change. So step up monitoring, SOC rules probably underwent a significant change, to be honest. Where is a particular entity logging in from? Earlier I used to see if there is a particular ID connected from 2 different IPs. Today I see, is it coming from 2 different geographies? So am I seeing identity theft that has happened, which is actually leading me to look into my systems and figure out why is this? Even authentication attempt is done, not even whether a login happens or not. So how do I work on that? Another perspective which actually made us rethink is the vendor arrangements. I mean, say, while for employees there is a level of trust, there was a separate set of things that worked out, but there were outsourced resources that are there in every entity, right? So there are 2 kind of vendor resources. One, whom you outsource activity and they do it from their shops or their organizations, wherein you already have some level of trust path, whether a file transfers or a proper communication or VPN or an end-to-end channel and all. But there are set of guys who are working in the premises. Now they have to work from their homes. They may not have the organizational laptops. You have not given laptops. So how do you handle some of that? How do you allow, to what level do you allow BYOD? Whether you want BYOD to be there, which was always, to be honest, if 5 years back somebody would have asked me, allow banking from home, I may not have, I mean, to be honest, right? So, but eventually we took some calls. We did not allow the branch operations per se. We still want some things to be confined there, but we now have got that risk appetite, to be honest, with the sufficient level of controls, saying that these are the set of operations that we can think of. So we have to relook our set of infrastructure, our applications, which are those which can be worked out from there. Another point which I also want to share with the audience is, during this time, there are a lot of things that moved from primary data centers to cloud, because people started feeling that it's more accessible from the cloud. Some of the organizations have the VPN itself on the cloud, right? So you have their base operating system. So that comfort also started coming in with the set of controls which kept evolving, and we kept on improving our controls to figure out. We do on a quarterly basis, we do our assessment of our remote access management. Similarly, I expect all other entities would be doing that. We also do a red teaming on our own infrastructure. So we try to simulate if there is an attacker which would do, what will he attempt to, so that we know upfront proactively what are the things that can go wrong, where the weaknesses are beyond our typical vulnerability assessment and application security testing and all that typical set of controls. So these are few of the practices which needs to be enforced, or continual improvement happens. And I can be very certain, and everybody would agree, there's nothing called 100% security, especially in case of when we allow something like this, right? So key trend which I saw off late, which is little difficult today to handle, is the privacy bit there, because that is something which is evolving in the organization, and my friend Vinayak is actually a much more seasoned guy in that. So I actually look forward to him for some of the advice. But privacy is one area which we think in such a working from home environment, how do you control something like that? I mean, the access is, my family member is sitting beside me and he's looking at the screen. What is it? I mean, I'm just extrapolating some of those, but these things are a cause of concern where we have to evolve. All of us have to evolve a set of our frameworks, controls to ensure that we adequately are able to protect our environment. I mean, at a high level, I think that's what I would like to summarize. If there's any questions, you can pick it up.
Yeah, very good, very good. Thanks, Rajesh. In terms of, you touch upon very important aspects, and what we have also realized that when the corporate network started expanding, the attack surface also started expanding, and many people didn't even anonymize those attack surface, as a result of which they have been attacked. So the best practice that you have alluded to is in terms of how do you protect that ever expanding corporate perimeter and then anonymize those corporate perimeters. Then it's banking on the go, not only for the customers, it's banking on the go for your employees as well, because of the current pandemic and the additional measures. You did allude upon the aspects pertaining to zero trust, which will take it up in the next round. That's a good segue that you led to. We'll take it up in the next round. But essentially, what I understand is the defenses that are required because of the current pandemic have leaped by 15 years, I believe. It leaped by 15 years. And CISO teams like yourself got less than a day to respond to that. Right, Usha can also agree to that. The amount of defenses that you needed to put in place have leaped by number of years, and the response time was less than a day. So very hats off to you guys for rising up to that particular occasion and ensuring safe transactions. Now, moving to Vinayak. Vinayak, in terms of in the current scenario, what we are seeing is the cost of regulatory compliance is increasing on one side, and on the other side, you have these new characters, the advanced persistent threat groups, which earlier used to go after only government organizations and crown jewels. And with the solar wind sunburst hack, we have seen that they were going to private entity infrastructures, and through private entity they have set up an avenue to get to the crown jewels. It has happened in United States. I'm sure it is going to happen in other countries as well. So how do you see this space evolving, and what are the trends over there, and what do you feel the best practices of to especially to enterprises and the CISO teams and the digital transformation teams? How do they create a fine balance between these two compelling factors? Vinayak, you are on mute.
Thank you, Rajesh, for the question. So if you look at how the cyber security and now digital security is also now increasingly getting tied up with the cyber security matters and cyber security efforts that has been put together basically. So the actors, as we see in case of SolarWind, right? And I think some days back, the United States has put some sanction on one country of its involvement into that SolarWind attack, right? And there was a coordinated state level play that we see all across the globe, and some of the countries have been very corporate, some of the countries have been doing it, but probably in a very obscure level, basically. So the role of state player in crafting those APTs to target a particular infrastructure and probably looking at the similar infrastructure across the globe had been quite significantly coming as a key important trend in last 4 or 5 years of time, basically. So geopolitics that we see in other domains of security, like a land, sea, economy, and many other domains, basically, now increasingly that is coming into cybersecurity space, and that is why the national cybersecurity architecture in each of the countries evolving quite well. So this machinery, which is trying to regulate, trying to put together the effort for securing the boundaries, cyber boundaries of the country, is increasingly getting into shape in many countries, and the West is leading. Definitely, US had been significantly putting a lot of budget on this part. Some of the European countries have been very aggressive. China seems taking a lot of those effort in this area, and increasingly many other countries are also awakening to so this threat basically. So one is not only to look at the crown jewels of critical sector organization, but also to provide that kind of a confidence and assurance about the health of the cyberspace to the end citizens basically. Because the end citizens are the one who have been increasingly doing their personal, social, and many financial transactions over the internet and over digital channel, and those channels are increasingly getting the way you have been doing payment now with all of these payment applications coming and UPI coming. You are never imagining every payment would now come to the level of digitization basically, and then the space and the speed and the kind of experience that we are getting in terms of payment. So that is creating a lot of digital footprint for anybody to exploit basically. So so the digital footprint is rising. There are multiple ways that you can enter into, multiple stages that you can plan your attack basically. Multiple vectors that basically you can use to craft a particular attack, and also you can have multiple goals basically. It could be very larger national interests or geopolitical interests you have in your mind. It could be competition, it could be data stealing, it could be disrupting any specific kind of infrastructure element. While that is happening on one side, on the other side, the infrastructure itself is becoming very complex, voluminous, and so many transactions are happening in that infrastructure basically. So the keeping this into mind, this machinery, cybersecurity machinery, national cybersecurity machinery, has been putting a lot of regulations. So some of them comes to the typical law, cyber law. They may be setting up together. We had our IT Act, and now we are talking about amendment of that IT Act in some coming future, because there's already committee set up for that one. Privacy definitely very different, and privacy talks about the interest of the end citizens, and that's why we last 3 years we have been deliberating on a privacy law, and there is already a bill in parliament which has been now deliberated in parliament to regulate the privacy space in the country quite with a very comprehensive regulation basically. So what these do means basically this regulation does, right? So the regulation try to put some burden, right? Compliance burden, and those compliance burdens could be very specific, operational, procedural level. They will ask you to do something, and they are increasingly becoming more granular, more specific, more nuanced basically. And apart from the procedural liability and procedural expectation, regulation also put together liabilities for outcome basically. For example, even after doing all of those procedural kind of compliances, still there is some breach happens, then there is an obligation on you because the breach had happened basically, right? So one is the procedural liability, another is the outcome based liability. The regulation put together, they put together a lot of those kind of requirement. The regulation try to create a regulatory infrastructure basically. So there is already some cybersecurity regulatory infrastructure, but something new would be coming in a privacy space as well. Data protection authority and all those regulatory infrastructure becoming some new kind of relationship would also be evolved, right? For example, now most of the organization who are collecting personal information in Indian context, they will be called as a data fiduciary, right? So this is a legal term now, and this legal term would bring a lot of those kind of requirement, obligations, and liabilities to you basically. So new time relationship would be putting together, new liabilities are coming together, and more importantly, all this has been also putting one is a requirement, and then there is also reporting requirement. So if something goes wrong, then probably there are 6-7 different entities you may require to report the incident that might have happened in the organization. So on one hand, we are seeing the digitization. When we are seeing the regulatory, how it is becoming more stringent, granular, specific, and very nuanced. And third hand, we are saying still the actors like state actors are increasingly investing significant of their effort, time, and money to craft that one particular attack which could create or put a particular organization, particular sector, a particular country at a disadvantage, basically. So this is how the cyberspace is there, and each of one which is managing their own security, they have to look at this larger, bigger context, which is shaping our cybersecurity discussion in the country.
Thank you, Vinayak. I'm tempted to ask one follow-up question to you. How many, based on the work that you do at the national level, how many APT groups are active in India?
So it's very difficult to tell that how many groups are there active in India. There are definitely all of those 40, 50 APT groups that we see have been discussed, and some of them had been, because once you are able to do something, is something which is happening at corner of a country, it's likely that will possible for you as well, and most of the organizations are preparing for that basically. There are some specific target. For example, there was APT on a oil energy sector some years back. There have been some Indian organization which have been targeted for that one. So there is some banking specific, financial sector specific APT. Very difficult to tell which are those APT, but we see that pattern that which are geography specific patterns, and there are patterns which are sectoral specific patterns actually. And those patterns, if there is sector specific pattern, it's likely to be some of the Indian organization in that particular segment would get. So there was some pattern on a services industry as well when all these work from home situation and transition happened to compromise a particular infrastructure piece which is allowing you to do the remote accessing, and that led to a lot of problem for at least 3-4 of the different services organization. So depending on the economic interest, geopolitical interest, these APT groups are really active.
I'm tempted to say that in cybersecurity, we are always being trained to look at east-west traffic. So from an APT perspective, I think we should also look at east-west APT traffic. And you can guess those countries, which is Pakistan on the west side and China on the east side. Right. So with that, I'll move to Ankur. Ankur, you guys have done a lot of stuff with regards to artificial intelligence, machine learning on with respect to the KYC fraud. So what are you seeing as trends when it comes to identity fraud related to KYC aspects, and how are you seeing this space evolve, especially in the Indian context?
Sure, Rajesh. Thanks for the question. And it's a very, like, while there are a lot of efforts in terms of network and system security that we keep on doing, but what in Signzy we have been focusing on is how to prevent fraudsters from getting into the system, and can I detect them? So if you look at it, like a lot of attacks that happen know internally how systems work, right? So first of all, you need to get into the system. All our focus has been into that. Can I verify people just the way I could verify in a physical environment? Can I verify them in a digital environment as well? So like you correctly said, we have been using AI and ML techniques, and over the last 5 years, we have seen it evolve a lot, definitely. And sometimes it's scary, but um, AI and ML techniques have now already started to bypass human beings in detection of forgeries in and identity frauds, right? So very commonly we see attacks like image editing. You see photo replacement in your identity cards, and people trying to get into a fraud system. Like any fraudster would open 5-6 bank accounts, which get labeled as a post processing later on that these are fraud accounts, but till then they might have done a lot of damage already. So we are trying to help institutions prevent that system and be compliant with the regulators. This is at a high level. And what are the evolving trends as technology is evolving? More and more sophisticated techniques are getting available to a lot of people. And like you correctly said, there is a lot of incentive also for people to get into cyber attacks, right? So it is increasing over time, and during the pandemic, it has definitely been, like Rajesh sir had mentioned, it's organizations have taken almost a like 15-year leap now. So similarly, like a lot of people are starting to get accesses because a lot of surface areas also getting exposed. So we are working mostly in identifying whether a transaction is getting in a fraud and who is doing that, authorizing the people instead of authorizing the systems.
Very good, very good. In fact, it reminds me of a funny incident that happened when I used to run telecommunications business for Tatas. And one day I got a call from our head of the company at Tata Cellular saying, "Hey, Rajesh, come inside once." So I went there and he said, what? Here is the prepaid account of a customer with the photograph of my secretary on that particular connection. So that was happening in the physical world, and I can imagine it can only increase multifold in the digital world. So the checks and balances that you guys are bringing goes a long way in terms of preventing that particular identity theft. So I'm looking at the chat screen, a lot of activity happening on chat screen. In fact, it is buzzing with a lot of questions. So since those represent the interest from the audience, maybe we can take that up, and then and after that, if we have time, I will get into the second leg of the questions that I had for the panel. So the first question from the audience is how to reach rural areas for customer awareness and building customer trust. Usha, maybe you can take it up. I guess it's more from a perspective of security awareness aspects pertaining to digital payments.
Yeah. I think, reaching the rural areas has been, let's say, a little easier for us, considering our, advantages in terms of the distribution spread that we have and the focus that the bank has. The license has been given by the regulator to indeed penetrate into the underbanked regions of the country. And regulatorily, we are required to, have a 25% of our total presence across rural geographies. So I think a combination of these 2-3 elements. One is the regulation. The second is the the distribution strength that we have in combination with let's say the telecom infrastructure, which was how the regulator conceived the payment banks. I think reaching the rural areas is not the worry. And I think we've invested in terms of customer awareness right at the business correspondent points, which are your typical mom and pop stores, your kirana stores, visited by the rural populace, and that has indeed helped us. We've tried to do, road shows, typical skits and stuff like that, which keeps the engagement levels high and which is easier for, let's say, anybody to understand. So I think that is how we've tried to address it. And this would again, being the top priority, we would continue to see how best we can use, let's say, social media, as and when the penetration reaches the social media, and probably even going on television channels, which are very popular in terms of increasing the awareness.
Understood. Of course, the mass media is being utilized to a large extent, and also the individual ambassadors in those rural areas are being leveraged to a large extent. Rajesh, this question you may want to provide your insights on. What is your opinion on the convoluted privacy contracts that customers agree to? Does it lead to lack of consumer trust because of its eligibility? I think this question is emanating from the fact that very often we are presented 20-25 pages agreement, and if it's a digital agreement, you can't even do an installation of a service if you don't say, I accept, right? If you don't accept, then you can't even move forward. All that you need to do is accept, and then arrive at the final screen. So probably because of that experience, this question is arising. Your inputs, please. You're on mute, Rajesh.
Okay, sorry. So before I answer that, and I would just put a disclaimer, this is my individual opinion and not the bank's opinion per se for that matter. Okay, say these terms and conditions are required to be there. And yes, I understand at times that it's in the fine print. And while there would be a requirement that should be explicitly put up, and it comes at different stages for different things. So if for a banking perspective, if I say those terms and conditions are put upfront for people to accept before they open an account with the organization, right? So things are different at different places. So privacy on applications, mobile apps are totally different, and that's where banks have a limited say, to be honest, at this moment. But from a banking perspective, most of the terms of the contract what is the consent, privacy terms, everything would be put upfront. While I understand there's a scope for improvement to explicitly communicate and seek a consent, and that is where in the recent PDP and GDPR and all, the right to consent has to be very explicit. It cannot be implicit, sort of, right? So what is that for? What purpose it will be using? So those things will be, I think with time, it will actually come to the forefront, and instead of all the other terms and conditions, this will be an explicit ask from the customers wherein they have to consent for something. They should have a right to forget. These things can't be implicit and can't be hidden in some of these contracts, which as a bank ends up with its customers. But on the digital platforms, if I speak of any of the collaboration platforms which we download from portals and we have Play Stores and all that stuff, I understand that is where we have a larger challenge, because if I really want to use an app, he will insist that you accept his terms and conditions. He accept your privacy terms. You also accept what he wants to read from your phone, and that's something. Say, while he has indicated, but our intent normally, not as an individual consumer of that, is let me use this functionality, right? And that is where it gets an implicit consent to something. That is something which will have to evolve. I mean, as people mature, as processes mature, as more and more regulations come in, these things will get refined over a period of time. But as far as banking industry goes, I think these are already there upfront. You can't, for example, just maybe a related term, you can't allow somebody to use net banking till the time he explicitly says, I want net banking. You can't give it by default. If you give, it's a regulatory violation. So you have to take those consent. But yes, if I understand the question right from a consumer perspective, yes, that needs a revamp. That needs to evolve more from a digital platform perspective than from a financial services perspective.
Understood. Probably there is a need to put a bot over there which will explain all the implications of that particular agreement before you sign the agreement. Maybe a good business idea over there. Thank you, Rajesh. Thanks for your inputs. So, Vinayak, you are better suited to answer this question. What is your opinion on data localization as proposed by PDP 2019? Will it help in preventing cyber attacks, or will it only be helpful for post-mortem analysis? You're speaking on mute, Vinayak. You're on mute.
So when you look at the privacy regulation, you look at actually 2-3 things there primarily. So one is there are some matters which a particular country has its view basically. It could be what kind of data, whom you want to provide the privacy, when you want to, what kind of application that you want to bring into privacy. So all of those things, and there is some very important thing which has recently emerged is the data and the location of data basically. So the another group of the privacy regulation is the content principles of the privacy, the kind of privacy rights that you want to offer to the citizens, and third part is the enforcement requirement, the regulatory requirement or regulatory architecture you create for the privacy. So largely in these three things, privacy basically regulation falls into. And when you look at the data localization, so we believe means we had also made we were part of that committee, our CEO was part of that committee, and we also made our difference of opinion there with respect to data localization views the paper has taken. So we believe that in the very globalized world, not only for Indian businesses here, but many other businesses globally, and we are into the situation now, capability to develop any part of the globe. We want to use our capability for digitization purpose, right? We are for the innovation, productivity, and for the experience that we provide, basically, right? So localization definitely is an important area of discussion, but usually privacy is being used as a primary tool to push some of those kind of requirements, basically, right? Privacy is being used as a primary instrument to push many other objectives. For example, localization, there are a lot of other objectives, right? You want to bring data here, you want to have the data centers here, you want to probably have some of those kind of criminal investigation to be solved locally, where data is local basically. So many of those kind of requirements get pushed to under the name of the privacy, and that creates a lot of problems basically. Even the stringent regulation like GDPR doesn't talk about localization of data. So they have some other means basically. There's definitely way for you to localize the data, but that is very progressive way basically. You provide a conducive ecosystem where data centers are getting set up here. You provide a conducive ecosystem for attracting the businesses to come and set up their shops around. It is happening in India. Because if you look at the global captive centers coming to India, I mean, billions of dollars has been generated out of India, and there are so many millions of people working in Indian geography, and they're serving for a global geography. If you go to larger IT parks, like I had last year I gone to the one IT park in Chennai, almost 1.5 lakh people have been working in that particular IT park, and none of them had been serving local requirement basically, right? And eventually the way things are evolving means we all are working. Most of the globalization that we had seen in last 30 days of 30 years of the time basically is a part of our economy becoming more global in the nature, and we brought a lot of competition in various different fields, and that has really helped our industry to grow here and other parts of the globe basically. And localization goes in principle and in practice and in theory and in principle goes against the ethos of the economic growth that we had achieved in less than 30 years of time, maybe achieving in the future as well. There are definitely some legitimate national security concern. If you are doing localization for national security requirement, that is right in sense basically. But if you are using privacy as an instrument for that, that becomes very difficult proposition for us.
So basically what you're saying, Vinayak, in terms of localization or globalization, it doesn't mean that it'll help to keep the cyber attacks away, right? People will be attacked. That is a reality. So
Yeah, sometimes it becomes very not only cyber, from privacy perspective. Like for example, if municipality want to localize data of all the citizen at a local level, basically, and imagine the politically that data will be very crucial for them to know what is people are doing basically, and people may misuse that data locally basically. So sometimes localization may create a lot of privacy issues as well, apart from the security issues.
Understood. So I think Ankur, you're better positioned to take this particular question. The question is, this particular person is asking, does organizations or do organizations always have to adopt complex aspects and complex technologies and theories in their cybersecurity requirements, or you could answer it from a perspective of protecting themselves from identity frauds or identity thefts, because AI ML tends to be complex at the end of the day.
Talks about complexity theory, Rajesh. I think this is a computer science term actually.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting term to solve cybersecurity issues. But Ankur, you can add.
Sure. So, like we have only 2 minutes left, I'll not get into complexity theory. But yes, to the previous question, it has to be evolutionary, right? So, it's not about you are always providing your data to a very large organization, which will have a very stringent set of regulations governing them as well. They'll not have a very strong set of systems and processes, right? You are always providing your data to the growing startups like us, right? So it's very important for companies like us to be looking at from a perspective, okay, what needs to be done today so that I can prevent the data frauds. Apart from the general audits that you get and the general VAPT that you have to have systems that can scan your systems, your entire systems on a periodic basis, and then detect like when I was mentioning on the red teaming on your own infrastructure, right? So with an evolutionary process, evolutionary methodology, you can adopt sprints into your cycle, agile processes in your information security vertical as well. So they help you start with something and evolve over time. So I believe startups like us who are young and who are actually taking private data of people should look at it, and instead of going with a very huge systems, they should start with whatever is small and what is preventing them. Start small and then evolve over time.
Yeah, absolutely. To add to that, I misinterpreted that particular question. From a complexity theory, absolutely all your encryption standards are based on those complexity aspects, isn't it? In terms of it's a catch-up game. If you see, first digital encryption standard has come, and then we moved into an advanced encryption standard. Then private public key pairs have come into existence, and now people are using SHA algorithm and blockchain-based systems. In fact, there's a question saying, how can blockchain make cybersecurity more secure? It is purely from a decentralized nature that blockchain has, whereas cybersecurity systems are all centralized in nature, whereas blockchain is based on decentralized architecture, so that if there is one vector which is attacked from distributed denial of service kind of attacks, there's another vector which is available from a continuity of services. So we're seeing a lot of adoption of blockchain in cybersecurity, still early days. Because of SolarWinds and Sunburst, people are talking about decentralized identity and access management on blockchain. People are talking about code provenance, maintaining the provenance of the code before any updates are triggered, and that blockchain can facilitate. Given the paucity of time, I could go on given the nature of the experts that we have on the panel, but Shishti will be very upset with us if we don't confine ourselves to the given time. So Rajesh, Usha, Vinayak and Ankur, such a pleasure interacting with all of you. Thanks for taking out your valuable time. It's not easy in the current times. And then allocating 30 to 40 minutes to share your interesting perspectives and your interesting insights. I'm sure the audience would have gained a lot from this session. Thank you so much, and back to you, Srishti.
Thank you,
Rajesh.
all the amazing speakers. Thank you, sirs. Thank you to our moderator, Mr. Dhuddu, for keeping the discussion relevant, significant, and so exciting. Dear audience, please take some time out and visit our exhibitors. Stay tuned for our next session, that is Fireside Chat on Future of Work, Amalgamation of Technology, Talent, and Culture. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Stay safe and bye for now.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.